So, how does the story of the Wolf brothers end?
Step out of the car! Now!
Life is Strange 2's ending is a complicated and messy thing, which is surprising given the tone of the entire series as a whole. Who would have thought that this story with a relatively boring middle ultimately came back swinging in the end, yet still managed to provide something layered. So, I have a lot of thoughts and opinions, and naturally this is going to spoil the entire game, so please click away now if you care about spoilers. On paper, I love the idea of Life is Strange 2. Why? Because it's a story about two Mexican-American brothers navigating racial, police, and societal injustice in a post-2016 Trump presidency. So, to really get into character and immerse myself as much as possible, I played the game with my older brother Kyle. He's been my co-op partner for the majority of my life. There's a 5 to 6 year age gap between us. We grew up with a single parent, and oh yeah, we're Mexican Americans as well, living in a Trump presidency. So, needless to say, this game very much felt like it was made for us. In the same way that we played Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons by both of us holding one controller, we sat down with each other to play this entire series. Kyle took on the role as Sean, and I took on the role as Daniel. While he technically dictated what we did, I would always give my input and critique on what we were doing, much like Daniel. So sometimes it would sway him and sometimes it wouldn't. And to even take this one step further, during episode 4, where they're separated, I didn't give him any feedback on his actions. At least, not until we bumped into Daniel again. A lot of the subject matter in this game hits home for us, navigating interactions with the police, the toils and false promises of religion, interacting with racist grandparents, dealing with an absent parent, and probably most importantly, the roles and responsibility of brothers in our culture. And you know what? When it came down to that final confrontation with Sean and Daniel at the border with an army of police officers blocking their way, it genuinely felt scary. My brother and I had come all this way. We'd been unfairly assaulted, manipulated, and separated, but we were finally back together, only for us to meet the end of our journey here. Me and Daniel in this situation immediately looked to Kyle and Sean as they were the one who gets to make the decision. It felt powerless and scary because I didn't know what was going to happen, only that whatever did happen, it wasn't going to be good. I had barely let my opinion leave my mouth before Kyle and Sean surrendered themselves to the police, which of course they did. Our whole journey and story had been about the cruel and unfair choices you have to make, the larger systemic pressures placed upon you that leads to a binary choice where neither option is what you want. But if one ensures no harm will come to your brother, then their safety and their life is more important. Life is Strange 2, you lost me a bit in that third episode, but I think you really had something to say with that ending and takeaway and... Wait. What? What the fuck? Overall, you taught Daniel to do his best to follow the rules of society.
Come on! This is fucking bullshit!
Okay, so I don't want to do that whole over-the-top reaction as a bit. I legitimately got a little angry that the takeaway from that ending is that Daniel learned to respect the law and authority, and that is why the Diaz brothers made the decision that they did. Because in this style of video game, the choose your own adventure, that's supposed to be where the player colors in the lines. The plot and the same basic character beats happen to everyone, otherwise it would be just too much to program in a scripted story. So the one thing that is up to player choice is motivation, and this feels like a bit of a glaring flaw in that.
Remember the rules, right?
This is really what I want to get into. The takeaway and articulation of all the endings represent a trend and problem a lot of fiction can run into, especially when tackling heavy subject matter. The desire to tell a satisfying narrative can cause friction with reality, so that leaves writers in a constant battle with framing their story and respecting that framing within their own fiction. Framing is something every story does. We've talked about this with Criminals, Earnest Boys, and I even touched upon this the last time I talked about Life is Strange. Every story has a frame, so when people say this game is too political, it's not only lazy and blunderous criticism, but just flat out wrong. Everything does in Life is Strange 2 is just trying to grapple with policing, racial, and structural inequality. And our frame for these matters are Sean and Daniel, both victims of this system. And framing can be difficult because it can sometimes rely on the audience's interpretations of the characters versus what the author intended. But in contrast to typical media, we actually do know the framing for Life is Strange 2. Square Enix themselves have revealed the metrics through which it judges player action. There's a long video describing it, and feel free to go check it out if you want for some poignant examples, but the gist is, the game measures Sean's actions through two values associated with Daniel. The first being brotherhood, or how close and trusting Daniel is with your decisions, and morality, which is as vague as the word itself. But it generally applies to how good of a person Daniel will become, how kind, empathetic, and understanding he is.
Sean, are you mad at me for what happened with Brett? I don't remember everything.
Now, a couple of caveats. One, a morality bar should never exist. Morality isn't something you can just create a point system for, but we'll get into that. And two, I know this is dipping my toe into authorial interpretation of Sean and Daniel's actions, which as we all know is a misguided argument, but keep in mind, Life is Strange 2 is a game. It's not a novel, it's not a movie, it is an interactive story. Sean and the player balancing these two values that Square Enix themselves provided is, at its core, the game, as they alter and change the narrative. Naturally, it's a story that could not exist without this concept of choice. We could be critical of it, of course, but this is the media format that's been chosen. So in this video game about choices, Sean, our Cypher's decisions are framed between brotherhood and morality. And the framing of brotherhood makes sense to me. While maybe a bit generic, it does get at one of the core themes of the game, familial relationships within the Mexican-American community.
Let's do it one more time, but near me. And not super hard.
It's just a snowball, Daniel.
Sean, you suck.
If Daniel begins to sway towards a morality that Sean disagrees with, then he can utilize the trust he's built with him to persuade him, which is really good in this game where your player character is not the one with the powers, where the true power Sean has is his heart and ability to communicate with his little brother.
I can't.
It's alright. Take your time. Stay focused. With me, Daniel.
It places an emphasis through dialogue and gameplay that highlights community and loyalty in a meaningful, if not subtle, manner. In fact, their eagerness to call it brotherhood also allows it to create an easier flow between mentor and peer that Sean and Daniel exist within. While Sean is the older brother and therefore has a bit more age and experience than Daniel, it would be manipulative to dissuade Daniel's own agency, but also negligent to think he always knows how to act and behave in a mature manner.
I want to hang out with my friends sometimes. You're gonna be doing the same thing in a couple of years.
Hi. I don't want to grow up. It's boring.
And this dynamic created some really funny moments for my brother and I when we were playing, where just like Sean and Daniel, my brother made all the decisions, which included some bad ones, like bringing beer to the party, or wanting to kiss fucking white guy dreads here. So, while I had no choice, I did get to tease him and poke fun at his poor judgment, which playfully reminded me of when we were younger. It created a fascinating parallel between us and the game that only brought us closer to the story, which, once again, that's the whole idea. This journey is about these two brothers working with one another, the framing of which culminates the frustrations of an older brother trying to keep control and a younger struggling to make sense of the self-contradictory advice he's given. And rewarding the player for maintaining a healthy relationship really gets at how important family is when you live in a world that judges you on your skin color. Yet, how isolating it can feel that there really only is one person in the world that truly understands you.
Listen, Sean. I can't do this on my own. I can't. I need you to help me. We're a trio now, and you gotta take some responsibility. I know it might sound cheesy, but we have to be good role models for him. He's a Diaz, right?
But you know what the big problem is? This brotherhood value doesn't affect your ending. I understand the ending is supposed to be an accumulation of all our actions, but this value is a cornerstone of the game's tone and mechanics. It feels dissatisfying to drop it when the other value, morality, is the single defining value of your ending right next to your choice, which, is there a reason why morality meters went away? In a very strict meta sense, there's no way something as abstract as morality can be contained within numbers. There's no true or false, 1 or 0 that can contain the greater context of what is good and what is evil. Video games were once super obsessed with karma or morality and it didn't work, and there's a reason it went away, because the choices are either so obvious as adopting or kicking kittens, or ridiculously simplistic moralization on behalf of the game developers. But, this game does have a morality meter that is defined by them as
Daniel's morality state determines how he acts in any given situation. Is he kind and considerate, or is he entirely selfish, without regard for other people's feelings or safety?
Fair enough, right? And admittedly, some of these choices are actually pretty good. Having to balance these two meters, knowing when to put your foot down on Daniel's behavior, really does accentuate the nuances of dealing with kids. Not to mention the imperfect choices provide also another layer to Sean's inability to articulate himself because he's also a child growing up and learning things about their imperfect world.
You told me we were gonna see Dad.
I'm sorry. I need to protect you now. At any cost.
However, this is still a value decided upon by the developers that sways these meters, and this is where we get a big blow about how this game frames morally good actions. That most of the time, what is morally good is following the law. Therefore, by breaking the law, you are becoming a morally bad person. And if you need proof, let's just start looking at the endings. While there are 4 endings to this game, each with a different outcome for the Diaz brothers, they aren't exactly 4 equal endings. The ending Redemption is clearly the ending the game wants you to get. It's the only ending that features multiple scenes, it's the longest of all the endings, it's the only one where the main theme plays again, it has the right amount of tragedy, it respects the political source material, oh, and it's called Redemption. In order to get this ending, Sean has to surrender to the police and Daniel has to have a high morality. And it's very effective in its, say it with me, framing. Sean and Daniel literally being pulled apart from each other at the Mexican border by police officers with firearms showcases how cruel and unfair the legal system is. While some might say it's not subtle, I'd argue it's very pointed because it needs to be.
Sean! No! Sean!
Come back! He's gonna be fine.
Daniel! You're not a little wolf anymore. Never forget who you are. Never.
Sean spends 15 years in prison paying for a crime that was never his fault, also his brother could live free. In its own way, it calls attention to how pointless acting within the law is.
Fuck the rules. We'll do whatever we can to survive. That's fair.
Yes, it is.
Despite how many characters who try to tell you that the legal system works. Because no matter how moral Sean acted, he still goes to jail. His actions don't equate to his sentence, and even when he gets out, there's something that's shifted within him. The trauma the brothers underwent did not magically disappear, and even worse, Sean took the brunt of it within jail. And while clearly Daniel understands this and consoles Sean, the cost of the legal system is omnipresent. Their relationship has changed and the cost of their journey has taken and is continuing to take its toll. Which is why it's so weird that Daniel's takeaway is that it's better to act in accordance with society's laws. Like, no it's not. The whole game is about the Diaz brothers being criminals, being on the wrong side of the law for no fault of their own. They're the victims of circumstance in a way that mirrors reality to showcase how flawed society's laws are.
Sorry I had to secure you. But if you're innocent, don't act guilty. I didn't pop you that hard. You're all right.
You lied to me. You have no leads. You have no fucking idea where my brother is.
I don't lie, Sean, but you did. And your brother is paying the price.
Morally gray actions like stealing or assaulting people are for completely understandable reasons.
I feel sorry for you. I really do. But denying what you did will only make things worse. I read the report. You claim that Officer Matthews' death was an accident, so why didn't you wait for the police?
No one would have believed what happened. We didn't either.
Well, it's too late now.
Like, what kind of nonsense is that you lose morality for stealing from a racist store owner who traps you in a room, kicks you, then shouts, "We need to build a wall"? Fuck that guy. Sean and Daniel are starving children, and the framing, or, at least I thought, was showing their point of view as the victims. Because days later, a news report comes out painting them as dangerous and armed, which in our world is commonly how we're taught to think of these young brown men who commit crimes. The nuance of our characters' actions don't seem to match the takeaway from the character, as well as it not matching my takeaway from the story either, especially because the redemption ending explicitly does not change on what crimes you did or didn't commit. Sean will always serve 15 years, so the story becomes even more about the meaningless notion of being a quote-unquote pure-hearted criminal. And it gets even messier when we look at this in relation to the other endings as well. In the ending Parting Ways, Daniel's decision to jump out of the car as Sean flees to Mexico is misguided by saying that Daniel's morality is tied to him following the law. Also, why would Sean not immediately drive back to go get him? And in contrast, the ending Lone Wolf, Sean getting shot while Daniel busts through the border is clearly the bad ending of the game. And not just because Daniel ends up looking like a brown Justin Bieber. The one thing I do like about these endings is it does highlight that the stronger endings are the ones where Sean and Daniel are in agreement with one another. Remember the brotherhood value? Too bad it doesn't matter! Daniel jumping out to be taken into custody messes with the seemingly core pillar of the game. And Sean dying and Daniel going to Mexico alone paints such a grim picture that it almost feels like tonally inconsistent with the rest of the endings. It's just sad for the sake of being sad. But there is one more ending, the Blood Brothers endings, and this legitimately might be the pocket best ending of the story, because you do it. The Diaz brothers break through the border and live a life together in Puerto Lobos, like the whole goal of the game. They do it. But you know what the big problem is? Because the writers need to show a cost for the player's actions. What was sacrificed to allow them to live that dream? Well, I'll let you know. The cost is Sean and Daniel become evil gangsters.
What's going on?
Because in order to get this ending, Sean needs to burst through and Daniel needs low morality. You see, they need to have done bad things and become bad people to get this ending.
If he's lucky, he won't end up like his criminal big brother.
While this is the second longest ending, most of it is just Daniel tearing apart the cop cars, and the small glimpse of we get into their lives in Mexico is just not good. The smug and angry expressions on their face, the aggressive way Daniel uses his powers, they've gone on to be tied to gangsters, and the fact that it has the gall to make Sean's eye black in this ending and white in the redemption, the game and writers are clearly framing Sean and Daniel in this ending as bad guys. They've got their goal, but it cost them their morals and their innocence or whatever nonsense. That is the cost and drama of this ending, which...
The truth is on your side. If you step up and face the law, you can be free.
At this point, I know I'm being repetitive, but I really can't accentuate enough how conflicted I feel on these endings, especially in the context of the entire story, because it feels like a bit of a betrayal of its own source material. That, in this ending and others where Sean and Daniel disregard the law, they become bad people for doing so, when the whole point is that the law and police officers are like a malevolent force for Sean and Daniel. Like, remember when a police officer killed their dad? Remember when a police officer can ram their friend Chris and get by on an accident? Remember how there's a whole blockade of police officers ready to shoot 2 children? The game does a great job at framing the law as a malevolent force that strikes fear rather than safety, which is perfect in a game about young Mexican boys. Why is it a bad thing for them to push back? Well, the good ending would say,
That's not who we are.
Exactly. We're not criminals. We're just kids. And we still have time to choose.
Which, in a certain frame, makes sense. They're not criminals, they are children. But them stealing food to eat, taking money from a boss extorting them for labor, or attacking a police officer who's going to shoot them doesn't make them criminals either. It makes them a victim of a society that's quick to villainize them.
Wow. Wasn't there like an investigation? Something?
Fuck no. He didn't have no ID, no nothing. Cops don't give a fuck about us.
No, you and your unborn parasite have nothing in common with me and my family.
Dad was an immigrant, and he worked his ass off, raised a family, and made a business.
Yeah, and his son ended up in jail. What a role model. Thanks for proving my point.
Damn right, baby girl.
I did what I had to do. I needed to protect my brother.
I know, son, but running away from trouble is never a good solution.
That's not to say that they can't become gangsters or criminals or whatever, but it feels weird for the writing and frame to turn against them like this. Just like there's nuance in the redemption ending, it feels lacking of anything in this one or either of the other two. Like, maybe they do disregard the law, but that doesn't make them bad people because this whole story is about how the law is failing. Or basically, Life is Strange 2, framing morality and law as synonymous, contradicts Sean and Daniel's whole journey. It's a problem because then the story only has stakes and conflict if you play as the oxymoronic, law-abiding criminal to illuminate the tragedy and lesson of the redemption ending. which, don't get me wrong, is a great ending, but it casts a long shadow that makes the others feel sloppy and misguided. But yeah, Life is Strange 2 is a mixed bag. I should say, like always, I like Life is Strange 2. I'd prefer anything attempting to grapple with the matters that concern people like me or any other community than another safe story. And I'm being critical in part because this subject matter pertains to me and people I care about, and so I want to ensure that the best version of it exists out there. And none of this gets at the other problems like some stilted dialogue I think we might be called beaner too many times, or the fact that we don't meet another Mexican person till episode 5, but then this would be longer than it already is. And I do want to say just thank you, Don't Nod, for caring enough to try and write a story to this magnitude. It's always better to shoot for the stars. And nonetheless, you gave my brother and I a journey that is sure to stick with us for years to come. So, thank you.
Sleep tight, little cub.
But for now, that's all I got. Thank you for liking and sharing this with your friends, and I'll see you next time.